Welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors. How are you today, wherever you are listening in around the world? I hope you've had a good one and you are now ready to listen to our conversation with Sarah Lawfull. And Sarah has a connection with both myself and Paul. We were all at an event that I was facilitating at Henley Business School, bringing ecopsychology into outdoor coaching. So it's always great when we kind of have former connections that we can build and draw on. So anyway, Sarah, over to you. If you're just able to introduce yourself with just a couple of sentences, kind of a brief overview, and then we've got more than enough time to dive into the details and see where the conversation flows.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I was a teacher. I discovered early years and loved being outdoors all the time with the children I was working with. And then I discovered forest school and headed to the woods. So it didn't take me long to realize that forest school, being out in the woods, working with people of all different ages, was where I wanted to be. And I was very lucky, got to work for the Oxfordshire Forest School Service as part of the school improvement team in the early years, part of the county council. And then through all that work, I got into training adults, and then out of that I got into coaching adults, and I've done training around various different aspects of coaching. But through my forest school work and my coaching work, I know that being out in nature is the place that people relax and talk more and think more, because I believe we are nature, and being in nature is the place that I feel better and happier and more well. And I think that's true for the children, the adults, all the different people I work with. So that's why I came to your special day that you were running at Henley, having done some other training there. I was so excited to see that training there, Anna Marie, and it was great to meet other people who are using nature and valuing nature in lots of different ways. So, and that's why I'm here today, because I think this is too exciting and important for us not to help people reconnect.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Sarah. And it's so lovely. And I remember the day with you, and it is exactly as you just said. We met, and and we got to know each other, and that. And it's so nice to meet like-minded people, and that this is great evidence of that network continuing. And we're going to ask you a question, and I think this question possibly is so apt for you, probably no other person really, in that sense. And we always ask all of our guests to start with, what is your earliest memory of being outdoors, and why do you enjoy being outdoors? And I just think it's so apt with what you're doing in your life and your career, with creating those memories for younger people of our society. And so we'd be really interested to hear your earliest memory.
Oh yeah, it's always hard to know where they fit, isn't it, in a timeline? But I think it was the conker trees on Cigarette Island near Hampton Court Palace. My grandparents, both sets of grandparents and my mum and dad, we lived in Molesey upon Thames and Kingston upon Thames and Walton upon Thames. So we were really all close around that area. So the river played an important part, and the conker trees. And I just remember them being massive. I remember the flowers being incredible, and the scent around them, and just being able to run in Bushy Park. My mum tells a story, I can't remember it, but me being in one of those big old prams, and she rescued some ducks and ducklings and put them in the pram with me, and wheeled me into the park to set them free so they didn't get squashed. So I think it's all around trees for me. And then, I was very lucky as a child. We lived in Devon on a farm, and I just had the run of the ponds and the woods and the fields and everything. And it was really quite remarkably brilliant and free. I had freedom. And I think that's something that I know many children don't get anymore. That's lots of memories. I was greedy. I just snuck loads in there, Paul.
And why not? Go for it.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Oh, loving a good conker story as well. We used to have one around the back of the court where I used to live, and there was a number of children who used to live in the kind of the complex, so to speak, and it was always a battle after school as to who would get there first at conker time of year in the autumn, to see who could get the proper big ones, and then like proper drilling a hole, putting a string, playing conkers. Yeah, trees, all about trees, love it. So linking the past and the present and your years as a teacher, and then moving into the kind of the coaching world, it would be great just to kind of unpack that a little bit, and then how you maybe consciously made that decision to move towards coaching, and then specifically working with nature.
Yeah, so I'd been teaching and then came into early years, and I was also involved in voluntary youth work throughout, well, for the last 30 years or so. So I was working with teenagers most of the time, and with very young children, and then got into working with young people who had particular special needs and had trauma, young people, autistic young people, and discovering that actually what the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds needed was the same as the teenagers. And seeing that, and then gradually realizing that actually it's the same that adults need too. And heading towards coaching was finding that what we were doing in education didn't feel kind, and how teachers were being treated didn't feel kind, how head teachers were being treated didn't feel kind. And that sort of led me towards coaching. And as I was reading about coaching and looking at what coaches do, I realized that was the same as what a really competent forest school leader is doing, or a really great early years practitioner. And then as I've got more and more involved in reading about coaching, and I wouldn't say I'm a super experienced coach. I use coaching in the training. I use coaching approaches in the training I do, and in the various teams I work in. And I'm currently chair of the Forest School Association, and I'm co-chairing a steering group for the Nature Premium campaign, which I'd love to chat a bit about later. But the coaching that I've learned, I'm able to use in those different contexts. I've coached a few people individually, and I've worked with some teams, but I wouldn't say at the moment I'm really functioning hugely as a professional coach. I'm using coaching within my work that I'm doing. But it really was because I wanted an approach that recognized the value of the individual and the autonomy of the individual, and that we need to kill the advice monster. We need to stop telling people what they need to think and what they need to do, and trust people because they are autonomous and they need freedom and they need power over their own lives. Trust people to know what they need to do. And I discovered through the training I did at Henley, I was really fortunate to meet people who knew lots about Nancy Kline's Time to Think, and I live near to where Nancy lives now, and I was able to get some Time to Think training, and all of that, every single bit of it, fed back into how we approach holistic development at Forest School, and how we facilitate a space. You create a space that is safe, where people are trusted, where you're creating the environment for people to do their thinking. And I think it was very much building an ecosystem of understanding across different, what would you call it? The words escape me. Different fields of work, really. So for me, it was seeing that coaching is the place where all of the things that I know people need to be well can come together, where there's respect and kindness and trust and challenge and openness to new ideas. I think that is probably a very long-winded way of answering your question, Anne-Marie.
That's fantastic, Sarah. That's really great. And you know, you're so right. It's that self-discovery, self-exploration, that whether you're a child, as you say, or you're an adult, it's still that exploration, isn't it, and pushing boundaries. And I know when we've talked to other guests and stuff, Nikki Basson talks about pushing out the comfort zone and expanding, that idea, but it's yourself and you're doing it, but in that safe space that you've created for them. And I think that's tremendous. And again, I love that across all those fields and different demographics of ages and stuff that you're talking about, which I think is something that comes out of your work. When I was looking at what you're doing, there's a lot of, that I'm not sure anybody works across such a big age range as yourself in that sense. So just to bring it a little bit more specifically into your work, and your business is called Where the Fruit Is, and it would be remiss of Anna Marie and myself to not ask you where the inspiration for that name came from.
Well, I was in the middle of one of these big transitions. When I went on my training at Henley, there was a whole bunch of people that had all turned up with quite a lot of grey hair, and we'd all got to a bit of life where we kind of went, there's got to be more. and for me, I was seeing things happening within education that I was very unhappy about. I had many wonderful colleagues who are teachers and head teachers, hugely committed, skilled, knowledgeable people, and they weren't being listened to. And they were not being allowed to do the work they want to do with children and young people that would serve them best. So I also, at that point, was really diving into forest school deeper and engaging with the national qualifications and all kinds of things like that. And at the same time, realizing that my job needed to change and I needed to leave a place that I loved really deeply. It's an environmental centre that had been important to me from pretty much day one of my teaching career. And, when your values don't align with the place that you're working and the people, and some of the people I was working with, we just valued different things. And it got to that point where I needed to leave. And it was pretty heartbreaking. And I'd gone and met with some forest school colleagues. We'd stomped about in some woods, and then we went back to my friend Jen's house for coffee. And I nipped to the loo, and she had a Woodland Trust magazine in there, and it had this amazing article. And one of the bits in the article was about a company called Out on a Limb. And I thought, gosh, I feel like that. I feel like I'm stepping out onto a limb, and it's really dangerous because everything I know and believe, I'm leaving it behind, and I've just handed in my notice on my job. What am I going to do? I'm going out on a limb. So I came home and I said, right, whatever I do, my company has got to be called Out on a Limb. It's going to be about trees and nature and people. And we started looking at that. We did a Google search quickly. Every company that's anything to do with trees is called Out on a Limb. If you're an arborist or you're out on a limb because it's pretty risky stuff. So we did a Google search, and that came up with a quote that's often accredited to Mark Twain, but it isn't him. I can't remember who the man is, but it's some guy in America who said, you have to go out on a limb because that's where the fruit is. And I thought that's true of everything, actually. When we're looking at, you're talking about somebody else who came on the podcast who talked about being pushed out of your comfort zone, that sense of that growing space, with Vygotsky, it's called the zone of proximal development. I'm a teacher, so I had to know about that. It's the place where everything is a bit risky. And that's why forest school is so brilliant, because it's that place where you're challenged and you challenge yourself. And when I watch young children, I've got very young grandchildren, they learn to do something and they straight away make it tricky. They straight away make it tricky because they want to push it and learn the next thing. So they learn to walk forwards and then they learn to walk backwards. They learn to walk in a straight line and then they want to get up on a wall to walk in a straight line. And out in nature is this place that offers so much challenge, physical challenge. And that knowing it's when you're challenged and that's the place that you learn, but you don't want to be challenged too much. And that's why I like where the fruit is, because it's actually where the juicy stuff is. It's where the tasty stuff. It's where the stuff that nurtures us and brings us life and joy and all of those things. For me, fruit is that real. Obviously, it's got the nut or the seeds or whatever it is that you're then going to plant into the next generation as well. And for me, all that's very exciting. I love a good metaphor. I did English for my degree, so metaphors are great.
Metaphors and coaching, oh, richness of it all. And thank you for giving us the story behind your business name. It's that, what's in a name, what's the story? It's so important and really has that authentic you at the heart of it. And a lot of our listeners are moving towards kind of coaching outdoors and very much sometimes in this business development phase. And actually the name piece, there's so much there that could be possible. And I think discovering the stories behind other people's businesses is just part of that kind of research. And okay, interesting. So yeah, and bringing it to your coaching practice, and very much appreciate that your coaching work is often in relationship with other initiatives, projects that you've got going on. We're always keen just to get a bit of a flavor as to, well, coaching with nature, like what does that look like for you, and just go a bit more into the detail.
Well, for me, it's often very playful and very open-ended. So if I was walking with somebody or sending two people off to have a walk and a think, we might start with finding a feature in the landscape or something that catches your eye, like a treasure on the ground, or just a really open invitation to see what's getting your attention, and then think, well, why is that getting your attention? Just have a little bit of a curiosity, and what do you know about it? Why and then from there actually start to think, well, what can this teach us about how we live? Has that got an answer? And the reason, I think that the moment for me, there was a defining moment when I was running some forest core training, and many of us in environmental education use the work of Professor Steve Van Matre, who set up Earth Education in the States. And one of his methods or activities was to give people a little cushion and send you off to sit for 10 minutes. So we would, if I've got a group of people, I give them, I say they've got a mask, a silence mask, a mask that's going to help them really listen. It stops their voice talking. It's a veil that they can put on, and it makes their ears work and their eyes work brilliantly. So you get your mask or your veil out of your pocket, whichever you want, and you put it on. And as it comes down, you find that lift it up, your voice comes back. So we'll use the veil and then go off and sit for 10 minutes. And on this one occasion, I invite people back, and we're silent as we all return back to the circle, and then just reflect on what's happened. And this brilliant woman who was a teacher, really finding life difficult. She'd got young children. She was teaching full time. It's a massively hard job. And she said, I was sat there thinking, I can't do this. It's too hard. It's all too hard. To become a forest school leader is too hard. To be a teacher is hard. It's just really difficult. And there's, my trainers, and they know all this stuff, and how am I going to know what they know? And she said, I saw this tiny little oak sapling. And I just looked at this oak sapling, and I realized this oak sapling was telling me that it's okay. I'm at that point, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to grow, and then eventually I'll have acorns. And from that, everything about how she felt about the world changed. And I didn't need to tell her anything. I didn't need to, And that was the moment I thought, gosh, nature does have the answers. Nature is teaching us all the time. We just need to learn to look. So I think my role as a coach is to help people look. It's things like, you're walking down a path, and that somebody is telling you something about a difficult decision they've got to make, and you get to the junction, and there might be 3 or 4 or 5 different routes you can take in the woods. And I said, well, okay, look, we got these different routes. What are these different routes going to offer you? And that's where you have the conversation and they tell you about the different options that they've got. And I go, well, which one feels like a good one to explore? And then just go for a walk down that one. And is anything here likely to talk to you about this option that you're looking at? And they go, well, yeah, you know, this is the one that feels good. This is the one that felt right. And they say, so you unpick that a bit more and just, well, is there anything here that's talking to you about that? And once I realized I didn't have to have clever questions, because when I first started my coaching training, I thought it was, you know, I had to have clever questions. I had to be smart. I had to know everything. And I realized actually the less clever I am, the least smart I am, the more useful I am to my coachees. And that's the thing I think about being out in nature, is going, there's this wealth of just rich beauty, and then there's challenge, and there's stuff that's dying. You know, you come across a dead bird or a moldy old badger that's sort of got wiggly things crawling out its eyes. Even that can talk to us about something in life that's tricky at the moment, or grief. You know, it helps. I find that when you're out in nature, the things that humanly we need to think about and talk about, we're just prompted to bring them up. They come to mind. So I always say to people when they're running forest school training and running forest school itself, that people will talk about things outside in the woods that they've never spoken to anybody else about ever. And on training, people say to me, I've never told people this thing that I've never talked to anyone about. And all the time we're saying, well, you know, being out in nature, this isn't therapy. We're not therapists. We're coaches, we're forest school leaders, but being out in nature is therapeutic. And that can then point people, I think, to where they do need to get additional support. And things might bubble up in the woods, or when you're down by the river or on the beach, that somebody's never ever thought has any relevance to their current life. And that's the point where you can say, well, this might be something you could explore further, but you need to do that with a specialist or a counselor or a therapist. I think being out in the woods is where people open up.
Yeah, that's lovely, Sarah. There's so much to unpack in all of that. That was absolutely fabulous, and I think our listeners and watchers are going to absolutely love that piece. It's about that curiosity, isn't it? That if we stay curious, we don't need those smart questions or the 100 best questions for coaches or anything like that. What you've just articulated, I think, is super. And I would encourage everybody to listen to that piece that you've just said and stay with it. And just your guiding, and as you've rightly said, and and even that last piece around signposting people onto other professionals if there is something that gets spoken about and maybe they need that little bit more support. But that was tremendous, and I love your veil and that memorable moment of silence or not speaking. And again, one of the things I'd like to just a little bit, I know you also looked a bit of Peter Hawkins, and I'm interested, could you just perhaps share with the listeners and the watchers a little bit more on a session of a team? Perhaps a bit more dynamics are going on. There's a few more people out there in the woods. What would a typical session, and perhaps, could you share, keeping confidentiality, but what would that look like?
Well, I said to you, Paul, I've really valued using Lumina resources and materials, and the workshops that I've done with the Lumina team. And taking the mat out into the woods is a great place, because nobody's worried. Nobody's worried. And it's playful. And so sort of looking at what are our personality traits. And just recently I was out with a group and we were looking at the trees, and we were looking at, well, there's some of these trees are in the same family, but they're all very different from each other. And, that's going to be the same about human beings. And it's no good this tree trying to be that tree. And then from that point, you start to look at, well, it's no good me trying to be you. But But actually, if I understand you a bit and you understand me a bit, we're going to be able to get on with each other better. And knowing that there's not a right way to be, there's not a right way to be a tree, you know. But we know that we can create a healthy environment for trees to grow, or we can put trees in the place that's the wrong tree, the wrong time, the wrong place. And so particularly having conversations around how do we have thriving in nature, and then how do we have thriving in people, it's making sure that we're using that kind of language that's non-judgmental. So it's not about you as a person are wrong, it's you as a person are different to this person. And we'll be in the same situation, but read it so completely differently from each other. And so how do we take away that non-judgmental language when we're talking? And so personally, I found the Lumina resources really helpful. The cards are great, some of the games, but also going away, the way I would use the natural environment is go and find something in nature right now that is a quality that speaks to you about a quality in yourself that you really are proud of. And that is so hard for women. I find women struggle with that because they're not allowed to be proud. Girls are not allowed to be proud. Boys are allowed to be proud of themselves, but girls aren't. Or historically, I think, fortunately, it's changing. But that's a really interesting conversation in itself. But actually, why can't we be proud of this? Pride, and you know, there's all that pride comes before a fall and all that daft nonsense. Actually, there are things we do that we do well, and we should be celebrating those. And just finding something in nature and then sharing it with other people, having that conversation with somebody else about, well, this thing happened, and then talking about how does that make you feel? And that's where all that embodied practice that so many people are really skilled at within the coaching world is actually how does this thing in nature make you feel, and how does it make you feel when you're talking about that thing? I once made a big error of judgment with a group. We were having a conversation about the things that are tricky and freezing moments, and how you certain things happen in life, and that's the moment you make a promise to yourself, a vow: I'm never going to do that again. I look stupid in front of those people, so I'm never going to sing again, or I'm never going to try tennis, or you know. And we've all got those. Or I'm really rubbish with money, and because of something someone says or does, and how that kind of freezes our development. And so I invited this group of people just to have a little think about what might somebody have said that has stopped them, as a way of getting us to think about how are we going to change how we talk. Well, I say I made a mistake. I don't know that I did. It was very valuable for everybody there. And people talked about things they'd never spoken about before. There weren't any answers, but it did give us a space. But several people went up and cried in the bushes. And it felt like everything was falling apart. But it did get us to think, how do we use our language in a way? And within education, there's a lot of, within the forest school world, there's some great people talking about declarative language and clean language, particularly with reference to working with autistic people, but also, you know, just for good practice. And I think that's something that coaching does brilliantly, or good coaching does, is how do we use language that is used carefully and cleanly? And you can be in a natural environment that is clean and healthy, or you can be in a natural environment that is damaged and destroyed, and, you know, thinking about our farming practices or gardening practices or forest management. You can do it well or you can do it badly. And it's the same with us with teams. And I think drawing those parallels and getting people to think in a way that isn't confrontational, but actually what would help us to have a really healthy environment within our company or our organization, where we can talk about the things we struggle with and we don't feel judged. And I think for me, nature gives us that, you know, to take your coaching out into nature, to walk with somebody, you know, to walk with a CEO, to walk with a manager who's feeling stressed and anxious, and you walk side by side with somebody, you straight away you're not presenting yourself as the expert, you're presenting yourself as somebody who's there to support and guide and help and ask tricky questions.
Yeah.
But it's not that confrontational in a meeting kind of thing, which I think causes all kinds of trouble.
Fantastic.
I just talk a lot there.
No, it's
No.
all absolutely fascinating.
It's
And
brilliant.
just this any notion of bringing a coaching methodology or a coaching tool into nature, then working with nature, there's so much potential there for coaches to really lean into their existing knowledge that they may have, or whether there's a particular, qualification, accreditation, methodology that they have a curiosity around. Okay, well then how can that then be incorporated, integrated, with nature? And the possibilities are just, infinite ultimately, which I think is why, or kind of one of the reasons why, working with nature, coaching outdoors, green coaching, eco coaching is so exciting and offers so much opportunity to really tailor it to what interests you as a coach. How can you serve your clients? And then how can you evolve as well? Because, ultimately we're all shifting and growing and developing our practice as well. So, and team coaching in itself is a very unique area, which is a huge growth area and really needed as well. Though I'm super conscious that you've got so many different kind of strings to your bow, and we want to be able to dip into a couple of different areas as well within this conversation. One of which being more around the accredited forest school training, that courses that you offer, and just maybe a bit of an insight into your journey through that, and then ultimately delivering these courses as well, and what's involved.
Well, so forest school is very young in the sort of iteration we've got that we talk about now within the UK, but throughout history people have been engaged with nature, and all the things we do at forest school, none of it's new. I say it's sort of ancient wisdom with modern education knowledge sort of attached to it. But 30 years ago, something like that, some nursery nurses were taken from Bridgewater College down in Somerset to Denmark to see early education, and were blown away watching these really little children climbing trees, lighting fires, using tools, all that kind of stuff. And they brought that thinking back to their nursery that they were working in Bridgewater. And gradually other nurseries and other early years people found out about it and wanted to be able to do it themselves. So Bridgewater College created a forest school qualification. So that was back in sort of 1993, 1994, 1995, all that was going on. And from there, it's grown hugely organically to the point where we don't know how many people are trained as forest school practitioners now. I'm the current chair of the Forest School Association. We have about 2,000 members, but there are many, many thousands of forest school leaders, forest school trainers around the country, all signing up to the ethos and principles that were agreed by this wide group of forest school people way before the Forest School Association even existed. And they're around holistic development, they're around risky, challenging play, really getting to grips with the seasons, managing risk, things like that. Very, very playful. And also the fact that we're using the practical skills to develop holistic human beings. So you're not doing them for the sake of it. We're not there. And it's also about sort of learning to care for yourself and learning to care for other people, and then learning to care for the nature around you. That's not, that tagline is used with permaculture, with lots of other outdoor approaches. So forest school is one approach. It's a very valuable approach that does something very specific around building self-confidence, self-worth, self-esteem, and learning to trust yourself and learning to trust other people. So that's forest school. And then the training, well, I now run a small training company myself, and I'm one of the Forest School Association endorsed trainers. So there are about 10, 12 of us now who have gone through a quality assurance process to be part of the Forest School Association endorsed trainers. There are hundreds of other trainers around the country who have yet to choose that route. They may never do. But when the qualifications come up for review each 5 years, the trainers around the country are all consulted. And then the Forest School Association works with the awarding organisations to review and write the new iteration of the qualification, making sure that we're taking into account all the things that people are learning. So we'll be feeding in things from several Forest School trainers are also coaches, and so the brilliance from the coaching world will be feeding into Forest School. People working in business, and with neuroscience, all that's been fed into Forest School practice. So all the things that people are learning, we want to keep updating the Forest School training to make sure it's super relevant to what children, young people need, what teachers and educators need. But as an approach, Forest School is being used in prisons, in old people's homes. People who train as Forest School leaders then go on and use their knowledge and their skills in many, many different realms, really. And some brilliant colleagues of ours down in I think they're in Kent. They set up an organisation to work with what do you call it when somebody's in the army and they're injured? Veterans. Yeah.
All veterans. Anyone who's been in the army is a veteran.
So they don't even have to be injured. But a particular well, that's good. So working with them, actually post-trauma, looking at people who've had traumatic experiences, actually how can being out in nature and using the Forest School pedagogy, we don't say to these adults, you're coming to do Forest School, but the Forest School pedagogy is what is being used. So it's and I've trained people who are working as art therapists, as bushcraft experts, people from youth backgrounds, education, environmental backgrounds are coming in to get involved in the Forest School world. So all their expertise then contributes to how we then are approaching the next iteration of the qualification. I'm not sure if that gives you any of the answers to your questions, Anna Marie.
No, very, very much so. And it's more really highlighting the diversity of what's possible within the qualification. And actually it's really expansive, as opposed to going like, oh, Forest School, yes, you're teaching preschoolers and that's the way that the qualification is taken. Actually, there is so much more than that, which I think for our listeners and watchers will be really eye-opening, and thinking about, okay, so how could that work for me? Like, how could that be integrated into different audiences, which ultimately is what it is.
Well, for me, when I was doing my training at Henley, I'm meeting coaches from all around the world came, and we were talking about what we were doing, and I was going, well, this is in the ICF, the principles, ICF principles, and the code of ethics and all of that. You look at that, and then you look at what Forest School is offering, and they marry so beautifully together. And the thing about the Forest School training is it teaches you about woodland management, sustainability, ecosystems. You understand the ecology of the woodland. You learn to use practical skills in a way that, you can light a fire, you can set up a bivvy, you can, so not quite as clever as you in the army, Anna Marie, but there are many very skilled people in the Forest School world who've come from an army background or a bushcraft background, and we all get to learn off them, which is fabulous. And the other thing that we really focus a lot on is nature connection. And so the work of Miles Richardson at Derby University, there's a whole university department looking at nature connection. And the work Miles Richardson has done has fed into lots of things that Natural England do. And part of the exciting work I've been involved in the last few years is working with Natural England and the National Forest and Leicester City Football Club and the Forest School Association as part of the woodland, what was it called? I always get things muddled up. The Woodlands Community Forest and Outreach Project, something like that. And it was part of the DEFRA funded and Department for Education funded Children and Nature programme. And so we were able to work with inner city schools in Leicester, training people to be forest school practitioners, coaching them with some emotion coaching to actually help them through the pandemic, to help them support the children and their colleagues and the families, and also seeing nature as part of the answer post-pandemic. And many of the children in Leicester City had no access to anywhere to play at all. The parks had chains on them. Everybody was so frightened. And the children in Leicester were the most locked in, lockdown children of the whole of the country. So to be encouraging them to get children out into nature was really important, and to encourage the teachers, many of whom had never considered being outdoors as anything they particularly wanted to do, or that was valuable for the children. So that's been a real privilege to do that. Very challenging at times, but very, very exciting. And being able to use the Lumina coaching resources with them was great, and the time to think approach with them. Yeah. And also to be able to get them out into the National Forest, into these really, really beautiful places. And we brought a group from Leicester City out on a coach for the day, and they came so our trainees could kind of have a practice run. And we took the children to this meadow with long grass, and the woods were just across the meadow. And they were told they could run into the woods. And some of the children were like, well, what's this? And the forest school leaders said, it's grass. And they're like, that's not grass. And to give them the confidence to run across this meadow, to get into the woods. And there were children who, at 10 years old, had never climbed a tree. They'd never jumped in a puddle. There were some little boys who discovered that there were spiders in the woods. They said, we didn't know spiders lived in the woods. And they spent the whole day looking for spiders. They had magnifying glasses and spider charts, and they were spider wranglers. By the end of the day, they were the experts on spiders. And it was just incredible. There were children talking who'd never spoken. And there was a little nonverbal girl who she'd just never interacted with the other children at all. But they'd set up some hammocks, and she was watching the children in the hammocks and sort of looking, and her teaching assistant sort of helped her and supported her and got her into the hammock. So she's then swinging in the hammock, smiling. She said, I've never seen her smile. And then other children came along and they were pushing her, and then she was laughing, and the other children, and they were all talking to her, and they said that never happens. She's 10 years old and that never happens. Nobody else is connecting with her. Yeah, in the woods, swinging under the trees with a hammock. This amazing stuff happened. And every forest school practitioner I speak to has got those stories, whether they're working with adults or children. And the impact it has on the adults is phenomenal. Really phenomenal, because adults have forgotten how to play, and they've forgotten how to do simple stuff, and they think everything has to be really complicated and we have to entertain children. Children don't want to be entertained. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be listened to. It's interesting. My husband has a spiritual director he goes and spends time with, and he said, nobody ever listens. Nobody listens. You have a conversation and nobody listens to you. And I have people come off forest school training who say, nobody has ever listened to me like this before in my life.
That's fantastic. That's really good.
And it's mind-blowing, isn't it? That actually something so simple, and it can change lives, and yet we're bombarded with noise and all these things clamoring for our attention. And actually to have time and space, which is why I love the time to think approach, is that time and space just to think. And nobody has it. And we watch TV, we listen to the radio, we have music on, you watch people running and they've always got their headphones in, or you watch people walking their dog and they're on their phone, or pushing the pushchair and they're on their phone. And I think all these, phones are great, aren't they? They're great tools, and for some poor woman pushing a pushchair, that might be the only moment of peace she's got, when she can actually answer emails, or I don't want that to sound too judgmental, but I think we live in a world that is so full of things clamoring for us to be connected, but all of them disconnect us. They all disconnect us from nature, and most of the time they're disconnecting us from other people. Which is where being out in nature for coaching is so powerful, because it's taking us back to the elements. It's I don't have a romantic vision of nature either, because nature can be wet and muddy and cold and stinky and all those things, but that's all part of life too. And if you coach out in the weather, that's a brilliant way of approaching some of the stuff in life that's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just perhaps just some of that touches so nicely as well, Sarah, on, would you perhaps just briefly tell the listeners about your Nature Premium campaign? Because I know the strap line is, children need to grow up greener, and that just really segues into what we've just been talking about, really. And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, being a trustee of the FSA, we had a board meeting on Zoom in the pandemic, and colleagues were all coming online talking about children, young people they knew about in their families or schools that they worked with, who knew that there were children not getting outside at all. And obviously, I was talking to the teachers in Leicester.
Yeah.
And one of our colleagues said, after all this, we're going to need a nature premium. So we've got the sports premium. The government went, hang on a minute, children are getting obese. We need lots of sport in schools. So they worked out a way to fund a sports premium. And there's a pupil premium for those children who are disadvantaged. There's also funding for children with special needs. And anyway, we got talking, and a couple of us grey-haired women said to each other, that's a really good idea that Matt had. We need to look for the grown-ups who can make it happen. And it wasn't long before we realized we were the grown-ups. And that's a shock when you think, well, we're the people that have got to happen. And because we were seeing these children and knowing the impact of not being outside on our mental health and well-being. What was it like for those children in flats? The children where the parks had these chains on them, and it was illegal to play and illegal to sing, and all that. And even in school, where they had school grounds, children were being kept indoors because people were frightened to take them outside. And there was this one of my granddaughters, I was collecting her from school in the pandemic, and I said, God, this is brilliant. There's like a maze of willow trees, and they've got red and white tape around them. And I said, what are the tapes? She said, we're not allowed in there. It's dangerous. I said, well, how are the willow trees dangerous? And the teaching assistant said, well, Sarah, it's because we can't disinfect the trees. And I was working with early year settings where the children, where they had all this lovely outdoor space, but it was all cordoned off with red and white tape because they couldn't disinfect the sand, and they couldn't disinfect the mud kitchen, and they couldn't. So they were all being kept indoors. Well, we know the science now is that being indoors and breathing everyone's air is super dangerous. Being outside was the safest place. Out of all of that came this conversation about children are going to need nature even more than ever. And so Professor Sapatha Dasgupta produced the Economics of Biodiversity Review, which was the government had funded and commissioned. And everything in his review said, the only way we are going to change the story of biodiversity loss is to change our education system. So we were talking nature premium, he was talking biodiversity loss, and we talked to him, and we talked to Andy Haldane when he was chief economist at the Bank of England, and we said, what can we do? And Andy Haldane said, you need to find the money, because the government won't do anything unless you give them the money. So from there on in, we've set out over the last 2-3 years to gather people together and go, how can we find a funding mechanism that will fund nature for every child from 3 to 18 regularly as part of their education experience? And we see that as, it absolutely is about children's well-being, but it's also about how do we create and transform a generation that will understand their place in the world, how we have a responsibility to nature, to care for nature, how actually nature is our life support system. So if we don't care for it, we're doing ourselves, it's us that's going to suffer. We're going to lose all these species that are so valuable to life, but we're also damaging life for ourselves. And it also addresses eco-anxiety, because children and young people are hearing awful things about nature. Nature is the place that terrible things are happening. You watch a program about tigers, you watch a program about elephants or whales or puffins, whatever it is, we're being told these animals are all in danger and at risk. Yet you give children opportunities to garden, to go to a farm, to play in a wood, to care for some trees, to plant trees. That has a massive impact on their sense of agency. And it works for adults too. We know that green prescribing has been recognised by the government as a valid approach to mental health for adults. And yet the approach for children is they're broken, they've lost all this education, they need more maths, more English. Let's keep them inside for longer. They can't go out to forest school. We've got to do catch up. Something is very wrong about that story, and we want to change it. So we're inviting people to visit the website. There is what do you call it? A questionnaire that people can, not questionnaire.
Survey or
that's not even that.
No.
You can vote and say yes, I agree. Petition.
Petition. Petition. There you go.
A petition. And you can sign a petition, but also you can follow us on social media. There might be somebody here who works with an organization that's looking for a way to support green investment. And we're saying we're looking for green investment in the future generations. So it's great that people are investing in trees, but unless you've got people who are going to know how to look after them and care for them, that's kind of money that's going down the drain. And, you know, we want to see investment in children and education so that they do grow up greener and they do a better job than we've done thus far, I think. Our website, I'll make sure you have the links for the website. Now, will this show up or will it be back to the front? Yeah, it will.
There you go. Let's get that. Yeah.
A really, really important message, and definitely encourage anybody to check out more. And we'll pop the details on the page for your website conversation. So feel free to check that out. What a conversation. Just, it's so apparent your passion for this area and how you've really taken a stand to do something about it, which is just so admirable and what we need more of. And throughout our conversation, you've named so many different resources. And we always invite guests just to, as we start to wrap up, anything else that has supported your coaching journey, development, or any other resources that you just like to share. Clearly our listeners and watchers love learning, so any signposts are always greatly appreciated.
Oh yes, I think the one that I am now sharing with any educators I work with, because I run nature connection workshops and storytelling workshops, things like that. One book that blew my mind was Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee Adams. And it's the most simple idea. You either have a judger mindset or a learner mindset. And it fits with education, where we talk about growth mindset or closed mindset. And it's pretty much the same thing. Fits brilliantly when we're having conversations about how do we understand other people. We can approach somebody with curiosity, or we can approach someone with judgment. And when you understand, when we know statistically how often our assumptions are right, it's quite embarrassing to know that we're pretty rubbish at reading people. And we'd never know the story. We don't know the backstory. We don't know why somebody is behaving in a particular way or thinking in a particular way. So I would suggest that book is the most incredible book. I'm sure I could come up with lots of other resources. I love the Philippa Perry's book, The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read and Your Children Would Be Glad That You Have. It's something like that, isn't it?
No, perfect. That's a real great couple at the end, and I'm sure that people listening through will be making notes as well at the other suggestions, but we'll get them linked in to all the podcast notes so that they are easily accessible.
May I be cheeky, Anna Marie? There's one more. One more. My husband won't be surprised that I've gone on another one. There's a book by Alice Sheldon called something like Why Didn't They Teach Us This at School? It's not that. I will send it to you. But Alice Sheldon, it's needs-based. It's looking at non-violent communication. And it's a needs-based approach to living.
And where can our listeners find out more about you and your work and get in touch?
So the Forest School Association. So you can, if you want to find out about Forest School. So I'm linked on there as an endorsed trainer in Oxfordshire. My website is wherethefruiters.co.uk, and I'm updating it because it's far too full of information that people don't need, and it needs to be much simpler. So bear with me if you look at it now and go, goodness me, that's a lot of stuff. And the Nature Premium, you can contact us through the website. There's a contact us form there, and there's a contact me form on my website too.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And we will make sure that we have all the links in there. What a pleasure. I think we could have just kept going.
Yeah,
but
amazing.
Kind of mindful of time so that, we could always invite guests back. And that's what I think a future return part 2 could be in the pipeline at some point. So watch this space. But thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your passion. It's been an absolute pleasure. And just to anyone who is listening in, how was the conversation? What caught your attention? We would love to know. If you're not a part of our LinkedIn community page, it'd be great if you could head over there. We recently passed the 1,000 community members, which was a bit of a milestone that we were really super proud to celebrate. But yeah, please do join the conversation, and maybe what questions you have for Sarah, pop on the episode's post or reach out directly to her. And clearly, if you've not discovered all the other podcasts that we have back in our library, feel free to go all the way back. We've been running now for over 2.5 years, and we've got some absolutely amazing guests in there, which cover such a diverse range of coaching outdoors and coaching with nature. So feel free to dip in and let us know how it goes. And conversely, if you have anyone who you would like us to have a conversation with, we are always open to suggestions and are looking for future guests from all around the world. Ultimately, we want more people to have an awareness of coaching outdoors and to learn more about it. So yeah, Sarah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to spend time with you both.
It's been tremendous. Thank you, Sarah.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.